Students, this is the next video for your Wednesday, July the 15th lecture. We left off right about here in chapter 11 on drainage patterns. Now, what are drainage patterns? Well, here you can see 5 different drainage patterns. And remember, you're looking from above and you're seeing all of these tributaries flow into a river. And here are the 5 drainage patterns: a dendritic drainage pattern, a rectangular drainage pattern, a trellis drainage pattern, a radial drainage pattern, and a deranged drainage pattern. Take a look at these patterns for a moment and see if you can remember them if they come up on the test. Here you can see all these creeks flowing into bigger creeks, which flow into small rivers, which flow into the main river. And with each of these, the patterns look, when you look from above, look different, don't they? How do I remember these? Well, a dendritic pattern kind of looks like veins in a leaf to me. And when you see a dendritic drainage pattern, when you see creeks flowing to rivers and forms this type of pattern as seen from above, what that indicates is the underlying rocks are horizontal sedimentary rocks, flat-lying sedimentary rocks. So that helps the geologist because without even drilling into the ground, we know that the rocks underneath are horizontal sedimentary rocks, horizontal sedimentary beds. So they would, when you see a dendritic drainage pattern, the rocks underneath are layers that are horizontal like this. Second drainage pattern is a rectangular drainage pattern. You probably haven't seen rectangular drainage patterns unless you've been out west, where you have creeks and they take a 90-degree angle and they take another 90-degree angle and they take all of these 90-degree angles. And so they go, and then they go like that and 90 degrees, and then they turn another 90 degrees. When you see something like this, that means the water is flowing through the faults. I'll get rid of this thing here. All right. Okay, there you go. So when you see a rectangular drainage pattern, that means the water is following the faults or the cracks in the ground. Here's another drainage pattern. This one's very common in Tennessee. It's called a trellis drainage pattern. And look at the way the creeks flow into the main stream at 90-degree angles, but it's not the same as this because they form this pattern that kind of looks like a trellis, like a garden trellis. And when you see something like that, that means you have resistant rocks up on the ridges and that the creeks are flowing through the valleys into a main creek, and then there's a 90-degree angle, and it goes, but the water's all following the weaker rocks in the valleys. So when you see something like this, a trellis pattern like you have in Tennessee, that means the rocks look like this, with the stronger rocks here up on the ridges and the weaker rocks like shale down here in the valleys. So this is called a trellis drainage pattern. When you see a radial drainage pattern where all the creeks flow away from the center, like this, they all flow away from the center. Now, what do you think that could cause that? Well, creeks are going to flow downhill, right? So this must be the top of a mountain or a volcano. That's what forms a radial drainage pattern, because if it rains here, you're going to make a creek here. If it rains on this side to the northwest, it's going to make another creek here and another creek here. So there's some topographic high here. A tall mountain or a volcano will make a radial drainage pattern. We also get this drainage pattern here in Tennessee where the creeks flow and they change direction. Sometimes they just disappear into the earth. It's called a disappearing stream. They seem to follow no pattern. There's no rhyme or reason for the direction in which the creeks flow. Now, this occurs where you have limestones, because when you have limestone, like we have here in Tennessee, karst topography, sometimes the creeks are going to just disappear into the earth. And you'll see those are called disappearing streams, or they're just change direction because they're going to follow the path of the uh, dissolved limestone. This is called a deranged drainage pattern, where there's no real pattern to which in the direction in which the creeks are flowing. Next thing we're going to talk about is sediment production or erosion. So rivers are going to um, flow from their headwaters, excuse me, down to the mouth of the river. And as the river grows, we talked about how a river grows, especially for meandering streams. They grow like this, right? We talked about that before. For meandering streams, they grow out this way. And we talked about this. So this is your creek here, or your river. The river is going to become more and more meandering with time. Well, this is called the cutbank over here. We talked about that on the outer edge, and here we have the point bars over here on the inner bends. Well, as the river cuts its way back and forth, it's going to add sediment into the river, right? And so what that means is that rivers carry a load. It's not just clear water now. There's sand in the river, there's gravel in the river, there's silt in the river, there's clay in the river. So if you go to the Mississippi River, the river is brown. We call it, the locals call it the Big Muddy. It's carrying hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tons of sediment downstream to be deposited on the Mississippi Delta, which is on the Gulf of Mexico. The bigger stuff, that's gravel and the coarse sand, will be carried as what we call bed load. So bed load means that pebbles and big sand grains, coarse sand, are going to make contact with the bottom of the riverbed. And the way they move is by being pushed along the bottom, or sometimes they roll along the bottom, or sometimes they skip up and down along the bottom. But they're big enough and heavy enough so they're always in contact with the bottom of the riverbed. That's called the bed load. What's the suspended load then? The suspended load is the stuff. I gotta stop using these vapes. The suspended load is the stuff that is too small to be carried along the bottom of the riverbed, and that's usually silt. I wonder why it became small like that. Let me just open this up again. So we got bed load. Suspended load is the finer grain stuff that is carried downstream, but it doesn't touch bottom. It doesn't touch the bottom of the river channel. And the third load that is carried by a river is called the dissolved load. And these are these are chemicals. I got a frog in my throat. These are chemicals that are carried in the water: calcium, sodium, potassium, aluminum, etc. So these are dissolved in the water. These three kinds of load are carried downstream. And where is the load deposited? Well, oh, by the way, watch this video. Well, the load is deposited in two possible places. One is at the mouth of the river, where the river ends, usually in the ocean or in a lake, and it'll form a river delta. And so if the river begins here at the headwaters, It's going to end up at the mouth of the river, and all this load is deposited here along the coastline or in a lake usually, or sometimes a river will flow into another river. That's called a tributary, but usually it forms a delta, what we call a delta. The bed load, the suspended load. The bed load is going to be deposited closest to the shore because it's heavier and it falls out of solution faster. And then the suspended load will be carried farther offshore. And the dissolved load is added into the oceans. Why is the ocean salty? It's because of the dissolved load carried by rivers to the ocean. Those chemicals being added into the ocean. So that's one place where the load goes, is into deltas. Another place it could end up is on levees. I hate it when they. How do you get rid of this stupid stuff here? Okay, so here you can see a river, and the river overtops its banks, and it produces these levees on both sides of the river. We talked about how rivers age before, meandering rivers age. These levees get taller and taller. So then an old age river has tall levees. Um, so just to reiterate that point, young rivers don't meander much, rapids and waterfalls. Then the meandering river grows and it becomes more curvy and it loses its rapids and waterfalls, carving out a wider floodplain as it winds its way as it becomes more and more meandering with time. Middle age river. And we talked about an old age river. An old river is going to have real curvy meanders, lots of curves to it. And you're also going to get these things called Oxbow Lakes. What are Oxbow Lakes? Well, let's take a look in an Oxbow Lake. First, I'll spell it for you. Old age rivers also have Oxbow Lakes. Oxbow Lake. This is really cool. Let me show you a picture of it. Google Images. Okay, let's take a look at the Oxbow Lakes, which are associated with old age rivers, such as the Mississippi, which is an old age river. See this Oxbow Lake? See this? How do you make an Oxbow Lake? It's not connected to the river. Notice that. Okay, I'll show you how that happens. So, so, so here's a young river, a middle-aged river, and an old river, right? The old river is a wide floodplain, Oxbow Lakes. How do you get these Oxbow Lakes? Well, if you think about it, this um, trend towards a more meandering river has to end somewhere. Otherwise, you'd have rivers that go like this, right? And rivers have to have some way of straightening themselves out. When a river becomes too meandering, like this one here, this river is way too meandering. The rivers always follow two rules. All rivers follow two rules. Rule number one is rivers always take the shortest path to the ocean. Two is rivers try and do the least amount of work possible. So rivers don't. This is not the least amount of work to move this sediment downstream. This river has become too meandering. There must be a way to straighten rivers out. Let me show you how that happens. So when a river becomes too meandering like this, what happens is it's going to straighten itself out. So if there's a big flood, what happens is the river will overtop the banks, overtop the levees, and for example, it might overtop it right here. And the river will take a shorter path and leave behind the old meander as an Oxbow Lake. So really old rivers have Oxbow Lakes too. Wide floodplains meandering in Oxbow Lakes. This one here would be definitely ready to become an Oxbow Lake, as the river will take the shorter path and leave behind the old meander. It's an abandoned meander. We talked about the fact that 90% of the world's rivers are meandering rivers, including the Tennessee, the Arkansas, the Mississippi, the Nile, the Brahmaputra in India, the Yangtze in China, the Tiber in Italy, the Thames in England. They're all meandering rivers. But we haven't talked about the other type of, uh, which is called a braided stream. So let me quickly show you what a braided stream looks like. These rivers look nothing like our rivers, do they? You probably, unless you've been to Canada or Alaska, you have not seen rivers that look like this. This is what it looks like from above. It looks like braids in a woman's hair. What do you notice about braided streams that make them different than meandering streams? Well, meandering streams wide, uh, uh, um, curve back and forth through a single channel, where you have multiple channels here where the water flows for a braided stream. You have lots of sandbars. These are sand and gravel bars. These are mined by companies. They buy the mining rights to these sand and gravel bars, and the construction trade, they call it aggregate. Why would you want to buy rights to this sand and gravel? Well, that's what concrete is made of, right? So this is a mine to make concrete, which is used in lots of construction projects. Do you think that the water looks more shallow in braided streams compared to meandering ones? Yes, water is more shallow in the creeks, in the braided streams. Where do you find braided streams? You find braided streams near glaciers and in the desert, places with low vegetation where lots of sand and gravel can be moved. We'll talk about glaciers later on, but let's take a look at see what it looks like for our northern neighbor up in Canada, eh? And if you go north of Ottawa or Montreal into central Manitoba or central Quebec or Ontario, you'll see lots of these rivers of ice. Well, these rivers of ice, after they melt, they make braided streams. So braided streams are associated with glaciers and deserts. A lot of my students have never seen a braided stream, but um, when you go to Canada, make sure you go north a bit, and you'll see it. Once I went on vacation with my kids to well, in English it's called Quebec City, but en français it's La Ville de Quebec. And as you know, Quebec is a French-speaking part of Canada, and I could speak French, so and I could read the road signs are in French, but I couldn't read them well enough, and also they spoke a type of French, the French Canadian, which I wasn't as used to, so I would ask them, où est la rue Saint-Jacques, and they would say, uh, tout droit, tourner à gauche, après 100 cm, 100 mètres, tourner à droite, après, but they would speak it so fast I got lost, and so I ended up seeing some of those glaciers after we got lost going north of Levees de Quebec. But anyway, it's Canada is a beautiful place. Here's your braided streams here. You got these are in New Zealand. They look different than the meandering streams that we have in Tennessee. Where's the cut bank here? Right here. Where's the point bar? Right here on this side, right? Does this look like a young, middle-aged, or old river? Well, look how curvy this river is. That's an old age river. Um, let's take a look at river deltas real quick. Let's take a look at the Mississippi River Delta. The Mississippi River is the most important river in the United States. Its drainage basin, um, we already looked at it before, includes 49% of the lower 48 states. So 49%, almost 50% of the land, the acreage in the lower 48 states, the rainfall from that area flows into the Mississippi. And here you can see all this water. Um, this is a satellite image. And this is New Orleans right down here. Up here is Baton Rouge. Well, the Mississippi River has deposited millions and millions of tons of bed load and suspended load. You look at all of this land has been added from the load of the Mississippi River. So that Mississippi is gaining land as more and more sediment is being dumped out into the Gulf of Mexico. It's gaining more and more land. However, let's take a look at something else here. Okay, the Mississippi River is currently flowing into this river delta here at New Orleans. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Geologists have figured out that in the past, the Mississippi used to flow over here to the west in the Cajun lands. And there used to be the delta here. And this old delta is still there. It's covered up by younger sediments, but it's still there. So we know that the last place the Mississippi River flowed was here. And before that, I'm sorry, it was here, 5. And then it was over here. 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 So what is this showing you? It's showing you that the Mississippi River has changed course 6 times over the last 6,000 years. Why does the Mississippi River keep changing course? Well, that's simple. Because as the delta grows out, as more sediment is being added into the delta, the river is no longer taking the shortest path to the sea. And so the river is going to change course to take a shorter path to the sea. So right now, the Mississippi River is it taking the shortest path to the sea over here? No. Here's the coastline over here. This would be a much shorter path over here. So what's going to happen someday is there's going to be a big flood, and the Mississippi River is going to overtop its banks, overtop the levees, and it's going to take a shorter path to the sea. It's going to do it. There's no way around it. Mother Nature is much stronger than man. And what we've done over the years is we've built dams on the Mississippi River to control the discharge on the Mississippi River. Why do we? What's the purpose of building a dam? Well, there's 4 reasons why we build dams. We build them for flood control. Back in the old days, farmers used to have to worry about their farmland being submerged underwater a lot more than now, and people dying. The main reason we build dams is for flood control, to control the discharge of the river. So if too much water is flowing down the river, we open up the sluice gates on the dam and let the river let the water down, and we do it in a controlled way so the land doesn't get flooded, so that the water level in the channel doesn't overtop the levees. Second reason why we build dams is for electricity, like TVA. Third reason is we build dams is to provide recreational areas, like Norris Dam. It has provided a nice area where you can go fishing or boating, and that brings in jobs because people are attracted to. They want to live near lakes, and it increases real estate prices. So there's a lot of good advantages we have from dams. What's the fourth reason why we build dams is for storing fresh water for drinking. So there's a lot of economic building benefits from dams. There's flood control, electricity, recreational areas, and providing a fresh water supply. But there's a disadvantage to building dams too. Who, which government agency is responsible for building dams? Well, it's the USBR, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. So the USBR builds the dams for all of these economic benefits that I just mentioned. But what these dams do is they stop the sediment from moving downstream. Well, what's that going to do? That's going to reduce the amount of sand going onto the delta, right? Where does the beach sand come from along the coastline? It comes from rivers. Rivers carry their load to the ocean, deposit their sediment on the delta, and then waves, currents, and tides redistribute the sand along the coastline. So if you're cutting off the supply, if you're damming a river, you're cutting the supply of sand to coastlines. So most of our beaches are eroding away. So we're getting mass wasting. You see the problem with dams? That's why we haven't built any over the last 30 years. Coastal residents are worried about their property being washed away as the beaches shrink. But we have also spent $20 billion over the last 30 years trying to keep the Mississippi River running its current course. Why are we doing that? Well, that's simple. The economy of Louisiana doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, you're for keeping the Mississippi River flowing at its current course. Why? Because if the Mississippi River were to change course, it would be an economic disaster for the state of Louisiana. All of the barge traffic up and down the Mississippi River is all centered around the current path of the Mississippi River. Were the Mississippi River to change course, then all of these communities up and down the Mississippi River would have to be relocated, costing hundreds of billions of dollars. The fresh water in New Orleans and up here in Baton Rouge is dependent on the Mississippi River flowing at its current path. That's why we spend all this money trying to control the river. And also all this federal money coming in with to keep the Mississippi flowing at its current path. That provides lots of good jobs to people in Louisiana. So it's political suicide to be against all this money coming into the state of Louisiana. The other reason is if the Mississippi River were to change course, it would follow this path because it's the shortest path to the ocean, and it would follow a river called the Atchafalaya. This area you probably know as Cajun land. This is the last part of the United States where they still speak French, the Cajuns. Well, if the Mississippi River were to change course and go this way, it would flood all of this Cajun farmland. So you can see why people in Louisiana want to keep the Mississippi River running at its current course. Here's the bad part of the story. Ladies and gentlemen, Mother Nature is going to win. Eventually, there's going to be a big enough period of high precipitation. The Mississippi will overtop its banks, and Mother Nature is going to win out. And the Atchafalaya River will offer the Mississippi a much shorter path to the ocean. And the Mississippi River is going to change course whether we like it or not. So From a scientific perspective, we can basically say that it's not worth spending all this money keeping the Mississippi River running at its current path. We're going to end up spending hundreds of billions of dollars if we want, and still Mother Nature will win out. Man has never won out over Mother Nature. She is way too strong. And I hate to say it, but we have to do what's right for the country, not just for the state of Louisiana. Instead of spending all that money keeping the Mississippi running at its current path, we should use that money to prepare Louisiana for the eventuality that when the Mississippi starts to flow over here to the west, and move these Cajun farmers out, and move our manufacturing facilities over here and our shipping facilities over here to the west. It has to be done. It's not a popular thing to say in if you're living in Louisiana, but Mother Nature is going to do it anyway. Here you can see an alluvial fan. We talked about those earlier on, which are formed by ephemeral streams. That's streams that only flow for part of the year, and you find these fans of sediment. It almost looks like a delta, but it's not. It's at the base of a desert mountain, and those are formed by ephemeral streams. Please don't forget, ephemeral streams are streams that flow only part of the year. Are they found in the west or the eastern part of the U.S.? In the western U.S. You want to see how a levee forms on both sides of a river channel? Click here. Click and watch that movie. Okay, here's a look how curvy this meander is. This is an old age river in France, on the Cirque de la Madeleine en France, and you can see the point bar, the sand that's deposited on this inner bend, and you can see the cutback. So the river is growing this way, from here to here. It's going to become more and more meandering until finally it becomes too meandering, and the river will overtop its banks and take a shorter path and leave this behind as an Oxbow Lake. There is the Mississippi. Look how curvy it is. It's definitely an old age river. Here's the sand on the inner part of the meander. That's the point bar. And here's your cutback on this side. On the inner bend, deposition. So there's from here, the river's flowing this way, down, south. So sediment is eroded from this cutback and deposited on this point bar, on the next downstream point bar. So you're buying real estate. Would you rather buy here on the cutback or the point bar? All real estate investors know this. You want to buy on the inner part of the bend. Why? What's going to happen to your house if you buy here on the cutback? The river is going to grow into your property, right? That's why the property is always so cheap on the outer bend, on the cutback. Wow. Look at that. Look how curvy this river is. That's an old age river. That is going to be left behind as one of these Oxbow Lakes eventually, right? See how that works? The river is going to overtop the levees. It's going to take a shorter path and leave this behind as a lake, an Oxbow Lake. Excellent for fishing, perch and catfish in these Oxbow Lakes. The Oxbow Lakes used to be part of the meandering river, and they're left behind. Why do rivers curve? We talked about that a lot, but watch this video. I don't know why Darth Vader is there, but watch that video. Here's the drainage basin of the Mississippi. 49% of the lower 48 states flow into the Mississippi River, all the way from its headwaters in Minnesota down to the Gulf of Mexico. Eventually, the Mississippi River is going to take this path over here, because this path is becoming longer as the delta grows out, so that Mother Nature will eventually have her way. Here's the Mississippi River Delta. Discharges are very high. Lots of water is flowing through this, and it fans out, making these, which are called distributaries. And so the delta keeps on growing, making the path to the ocean longer and longer, eventually leading to the Mississippi River changing course again, right? This is a river, the Ganges River, going through Bangladesh, and here you can see the delta. Look at the Nile River. I don't know why people have this strange idea that rivers only flow south. They can flow north. They're just going to flow downhill. And the Nile flows into the Mediterranean. And look at how fertile the deltas are. Almost all the farming in Egypt occurs in this area here for the Nile River Delta. So why is that important? Well, deltas are filled with plant and animal life, right? You can see that from this aerial photograph. Well, I just showed you that the Mississippi River has 6 deltas in the past 6,000 years. Why did we figure that out? We didn't figure that out so geology teachers can teach about it. ExxonMobil found that out. Why does ExxonMobil want to know where these ancient deltas are? Because that's where the oil is and the natural gas. Deltaic sedimentary deposits are some of the best places to drill for oil. ExxonMobil and British Petroleum have made hundreds of billions of dollars from pumping oil out of the Gulf of Mexico. And I tell you what, I know some other professors are going to tell you that these oil companies are bad, but I tell you, we do have a global warming problem. We do need to stop pumping. We need to produce green energy. I agree with that. And the earth is warming up due to us burning fossil fuels. But the truth of the matter is, we cannot stop using oil and natural gas completely for a long time. Why? Because our economy will crash. The green energy is too expensive right now. Oil and natural gas are way cheaper. If we were to move to green energy, solar and wind power, it would our energy costs would go up 5 times. It's not. I agree. We should go to green energy, but we're going to still need oil and natural gas for the next at least 30, 40 years. Now, I always see these politicians say ExxonMobil is this evil, greedy company making hundreds of billions of dollars. But why do they say that about ExxonMobil, which is the last American oil company left? Everything else has been bought out by other countries. ExxonMobil hires thousands of people, and they generate hundreds of billions of dollars, and they put it into the U.S. economy. And what's wrong with making a lot of money? Socialism doesn't work. Capitalism works. So I just don't understand that argument. And then no one blames Apple or Microsoft or Amazon for making hundreds of billions of dollars. I'm going to get off the political thing here, but okay. What are stream terraces? Well, if if you have uplift of the land, if the land is uplifted, the creeks and the rivers will respond by cutting downwards, and you produce these things called entrenched meanders. So the meanders, so the river cuts down, leaving behind this tall land on all sides. And this happens quite often out west, where you have mountain building. When there's an uplift of the land, the river cuts down and deep like this. and it leaves behind the old floodplains. So stream terraces are old floodplains that are left behind as a river cuts down as a response to the uplift of the land through mountain building. So a stream terrace is an abandoned floodplain. I'm going to try and draw you a picture and show you how that happens. So let's say here's a river channel, right? If the land is uplifted erosion, and through mountain building, then the river will cut down, and the old floodplain will be left behind as a terrace, and you have a new floodplain. Okay. I'm going to call it quits for now, but we'll talk about groundwater next.